Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We are going to give people just a minute or so to kind of trickle in. But in the meantime, we'd love to know, those of you that are joining us today, where you are joining from. It's great to know where we're having people watch and engage from. I'm in the Seattle area right now, and we are experiencing a nice Seattle time, but it's gray as always, most of it. We've got some Portland, we've got some Cleveland. Oh, nice. -8 today. Oof, it's rough out there. Des Moines, Iowa. Okay. San Francisco. And I know that Ruth and Andy are joining us from all over the place as well. Ruth's in New York, and Andy is in the UK, just outside of London, I believe. Oh. Fort Collins, South Carolina, snow. Okay, there's snow. Cold but majestic. I like that. I'm gonna start using that for the rest of my Seattle description today. Cold but majestic.
I like that view. I'll swap views.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so glad to have you, and we appreciate that you are spending your time with us. So our webinar today, Hidden Gaps Where Mentoring Programs Fail, we're very excited about, especially because it's January, and in the US, it's National Mentoring Month. So it seems like a very apropos topic for us to be jumping into, talking about mentoring programs. So I want to introduce who we have here today. And I'll start off with Dr. Ruth Gotian, Chief Learning Officer and Associate Professor of Education and Anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medicine. She's a globally recognized expert in mentorship and leadership development. Hailed by Nature, Wall Street Journal, and Columbia University, she was named a top 20 mentor worldwide. And Thinkers 50 ranked her as the #1 emerging management thinker in 2021. And LinkedIn recognized her as a top voice in mentoring in 2023, as well as she was named a top 50 executive coach in the world in 2024. Ruth contributes to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Psychology Today, where she shares insights on optimizing success. And then next up is Andy Lopata. Andy is an acclaimed professional relationship strategist who has worked with global clients, including PayPal, GlaxoSmithKline, and Brother. He has written 6 books on networking and professional relationships. And with his 6th book, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring, which he and Ruth have co-authored together, was published in spring of 2024. Andy writes a regular blog for Psychology Today and has often been quoted in the media, including the Sunday Times, Financial Times, and Inc. And the Financial Times called Andy one of Europe's leading business networking strategists. And both Forbes and The Independent called him a true master of networking. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. We really appreciate it. And now, for any of you who are new with us today and maybe aren't as familiar with Chronus, I wanted to give you a little bit more information about us as well. So Chronus is a purpose-driven development platform that offers mentoring and ERG management software to help enterprise organizations combat the disengagement and organizational connection crisis. We've helped large enterprises, government agencies, nonprofits, and academic institutions for the last 15 plus, almost 20 years at this point, with a platform that makes customers feel secure, supported, and ready to scale. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help your organization build a purposeful development strategy at any point during the presentation, feel free to click that Talk to Our Experts button up in the right-ish corner above the screen, and we can get you connected to one of our experts. Now, before we go any further, I do want to just give us a quick run through of how the chat and Q&A and things like that work. At any point in time, please feel free to put any comments or questions, anything into the chat. respond to your fellow attendees. Anything that you'd like to engage with, please let us know. If you have formal questions, you can put them into the Q&A section that's over there as well. And if you're not sure whether it goes in chat or Q&A, just put it in chat. We'll make sure it gets to the right place. And then there's also a doc section right next to that Q&A in the right-hand panel. If you click on that, you'll see several resources that we've provided. These are, resources from Ruth and Andy's book, as well as a quiz on, where you are in your mentoring journey, as well as our National Mentoring Month resources. So feel free to check those out as well. A lot of great things in there. And with that, we are also going to learn a little bit more about you all as we get started. So I want to open up a kind of quick poll, 2 quick polls before we start. So we're going to first figure out, what is your mentoring role? So this is, for any of you who are part of a mentoring relationship, what exactly are you? Are you a mentor? Are you a mentee? Are you both? Are you neither? It's always good to get a sense of how people have been involved in mentoring up to this point. So go ahead and fill that out for us and let us get a better understanding of your all's experience. All right. Looks like we see a lot of mentors and mentees both in there. That's nice. And a lot of mentors. Good. And Ruth and Andy, I don't know if you usually see that there's one or the other when you're doing webinars and things like this, or whether this is kind of par for the course for what you're usually saying.
It really depends on the audience. What I'm always looking for is the people that vote both, and it's really good to see a good proportion are voting that way. I don't want to influence anyone who hasn't clicked yet, but what frustrates, I think, both of us is that people have this perception that you go on a journey where you're a mentee for a period of time and then you become a mentor, when actually at any point in your career, you can both benefit from the mentoring of other people and you can help others with the mentoring that you do for them. So I'm always looking out for that both. Ruth, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Andy. It's like that article that we wrote for Fast Company about why even CEOs need mentors. Sure, they mentor other people and the people below them in the organizational hierarchy, but where the CEO is supposed to go for mentorship, which is why we advocate that you need to be both a mentor and a mentee simultaneously.
Yeah. All right, we appreciate you all engaging with us on that. And if you'll bear with us one more question. So now we want to know, are any of you a mentoring program owner or admin? So are you someone who runs a mentoring program or helps to run a mentoring program for your organization? Because we also want to know, those of you who might be a mentor or mentee might also be running a program for your organization. We're seeing a lot of yes. I feel like that makes a lot of sense with the topic we have at hand today. So good to know we also have a lot of program champions.
So the interesting thing for me there, and it might be something I can see Ayana's commented in the chat, is that use the chat for this. Is there a crossover? Are you an administrator or owner of a mentoring program and you answered neither to your mentoring or being mentored? Because I also believe, it's very easy to get caught up in delivering mentoring for other people, but forgetting about the support for yourself and your own career as well.
Like the shoemaker has no shoes.
Yeah, Kate said program admin, but not program participant. And it doesn't have to be within a program. Although, why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't you qualify as well? But when I work with HR and learning and development communities, it's amazing how often people suddenly realize that actually it's nice to focus on ourselves rather than just service to other people as well.
And that's where going outside your organization is often so helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe this will push some of our program admins to look for their next mentor in their program.
And I would
That's
argue
what
the
I-
program admins are what we call a community of practice, and they should find a way to communicate with each other and possibly be mentors and mentees to each other. Just a
Yeah.
thought, planting a seed.
And there's organisations like CIPD and Learning and Performance Institute as two examples where that's precisely what happens.
Yeah. Well, we will thank you all so much for giving us a bit more information about you all. It just helps to kind of inform the rest of the discussion as we get into it. So now we're going to kind of start with our fireside chat. I do think if we're going to continue using fireside chat, there should be a mandatory fireplace and behind everyone, I think, at this point going forward.
Agree with one.
A little cozier. But since we don't have that today, we will just get into it. But I wanted to, Ruth and Andy, I wanted to kind of start off a little bit. I know we're going to be talking about mentoring programs in particular, but, stepping back a little bit in 2025, we're in January, beginning of the year, we're in National Mentoring Month for the US. And what is it about mentoring? It seems like an age-old, timeless thing, but what is it about mentoring that feels so necessary or vital to the time that we're in right now in 2025? What do you see as kind of the biggest challenges, whether it's within the workplace or whether it's within, professional organizations or, even academic organizations? Like, what makes mentoring kind of still so important to helping things run and succeed in the workplace and beyond today?
Well, I think as with any time period, you don't know what you don't know. And there's someone who has either come before you or been beside you who has a different perspective or is even junior to you who can teach you something. So I think it is that guide by your side who can chart a path forward that you might not have seen. And with things changing so quickly and in such different ways, these people can really help you and guide you and open doors for you that you did not even know existed. We can talk later about the virtual and AI and how we now talk about mentoring teams instead of just a senior mentor. These are all new ways to move forward.
Yeah, I would add to that and go to the specifics of your question of in this time, because everything that Ruth said, you always need and we've always needed. I was having conversation with some colleagues of mine yesterday about where we're at this year. And this is as people who run our own business, but I think this spreads to everyone, whatever their role is and wherever they are, to a large degree. And in the UK, we've just had a change of government, and they are going through a rocky time because if you take the generous view, they're looking for long-term growth, which has short-term impacts, which isn't very popular at the moment. The US, you've just had a change of government, and what that government is talking about doing on an economic level in terms of tariffs and various other things is creating a lot of economic uncertainty, both in the US, I'm sure, but certainly globally, as someone in the UK. And when we're in times of uncertainty like this, and I can go back to 2016 and perhaps before, but for both our countries, 2016 was a major landmark year in terms of political uncertainty. It impacts us in our jobs, and when you have times where you're not sure if your job is going to be there in 6 months' time or a year's time, whether you don't know if your business is going to be there or the company that employs you, you need that support even more. When you factor the uncertainty over AI and the impact of AI on all of our jobs into that as well, we are probably going through at this very time as uncertain a period for individuals as any time I can remember. So what better argument do you need for having people to turn to support and bounce ideas off and sense check and everything else that a mentor will provide than all of that uncertainty that we're surrounded by?
Yeah, and I think the uncertainty, you mentioned it, is kind of sits with us or weighs heavily on us in whatever role we're in, whether we're a student, whether we're working, whether we're, trying to figure out what our next step in the career is, or, we're looking for that next job or something like that. And it's kind of the thing that mentoring brings is both career development and these kind of skill development aspects, but it's also this maybe a little bit of empathy and a little bit of, kind of support just to in the moment of what do I do and what do I do with all this uncertainty and how do I move forward in those next steps and what should I be looking at or paying attention to, and having someone else to kind of talk that through is just, if anything else, it keeps us from spiraling on it in our own minds at times and getting it out into the world.
Amanda, if I could just wear my academic hat, what you just described, there's actually been a ton of research, and this is Kathy Cram out of Boston, described the two functions of a mentor. And basically, she said exactly what you said. There's the two main functions. One has to do with the job, right? Helping you get the job, prepare for the job, do the job, go on to the next job. And the second function of a mentor is the psychosocial support. Be your cheerleader, your shoulder to cry on, the one who can give you that perspective because you are just so down on what just went wrong, but somebody who can lift you up and cheer you up and be that structure for you. So I think it's always important to remember that there are two sides to a mentor, and sometimes one has to take precedence over the other based on the situation.
Yeah, no, I know that's so true. And we know, in this modern world with generations coming up, and we've got millennials, we've got Gen Z, we still have Gen X and boomers, and I think we're officially entering the soon-to-be Gen Beta, with babies being born now, or entering that next generation. So it's continually changing, but I feel like the need for mentoring doesn't really change in that way. I mean, we've got stats that show that it's just as important a need for millennials as it is for Gen Z, even though there's differences in those generations, even though we have this kind of new world of AI coming out. It doesn't seem like people are moving away from it, even though there's all this kind of technical advancement. And I'd love to know how you all are seeing that need for mentoring that plays out with this evolving, kind of digital world.
I think mentoring will always be there. I think it'll just look different. As I said earlier, we used to have that older, grayer, senior person in the C-suite who was the mentor. But now we've established a different look to mentoring, including mentoring teams, which also includes what are called reverse mentors. Those people who are junior to you who are now mentoring. So as you said, this Gen X, Gen Z, eventually we'll have the Alpha, are mentoring senior leaders. This was actually started by Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE back in the day in the 90s. He actually had the junior employees mentor the senior leadership on the internet, because the senior leadership didn't understand it, didn't know what to do with it. And the ones who were more junior, for them, it was just Candyland. They loved it. So they were mentoring the senior people on how to leverage the internet. So we've been doing this for a long time. We just didn't give it a label before.
It was interesting, the statistics that you showed. One of my presentations is mentoring in the modern world. One of my key points is the Gen Z and the millennial generation expect to be mentored in a way that I don't think our generations, I'm a Gen X, I don't think we did expect it in the same way. It was almost, if you're on a talent program, you get mentored. But otherwise you get left behind, and it's not an expectation. That's becoming an expectation, which really interests me, because you almost expect people to become more interested in things like that as they become older in their career. Millennials, it makes sense. Gen Z, that's really striking to me. So I think that driving expectation is going to put pressure on organizations who have only focused on certain groups for their mentoring program to find a different way to deliver it, because they're suddenly going to have to deliver it at a different scale. One of the statistics that I share, and I don't know if it's on one of your later slides, is the average stay for a millennial or Gen Z in the workplace is 2 years now. But if they are mentored, they stay for 5. So when retention is such a big challenge for organizations worldwide, We need to find ways to keep people in place, and one of those ways is mentoring. When people are inevitably going to leave anyway, you want them to be saying good things about you. Mentoring is a tool to enable that. So those statistics you put up on that slide are particularly striking from that perspective. Picking up on Ruth's point, it would be quite interesting to see in the chat. We've got a number of admins and mentoring program owners on the call now. Ruth talked about the shift from what we call in the book the traditional hierarchical approach to mentoring, which is the senior sage and the more junior younger person sitting at their feet and learning from them, to reverse mentoring, reciprocal mentoring, peer mentoring, and so forth. So it would be interesting to know if the programs that are being run by people present on this call follow the traditional hierarchical model. Do you have your senior execs mentoring up and coming people, or have you mixed it up a little bit?
Yeah, it'd be great to know, for those of you who are joining us today, what kind of mentoring are you doing? And obviously the traditional sense is still very, very common, a career mentoring kind of format that is tried and true, but we are seeing more of the reverse mentoring programs and even flash mentoring programs, or that kind of maybe, one-off meeting with someone who you're trying to learn a very specific skill or set of knowledge from. So any of you who are doing, the program administrative work, let us know what you all are working on. Hillary mentioned we do peer mentoring, almost no senior sage style. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of knowledge obviously to be gained across an organization, from very different pieces of the employee journey, and mixing and matching those as you kind of see fit for your organizational goals is so important. Caroline trying to mix it up, but we struggle to get mentors to sign up. I think we're going to
I'd love to touch on Carolyn's point, because it's something that I
Mhm.
talk about quite often. And this is what I tell the senior mentors, where I say, if you go through this program of ours, you will be called a master mentor, and that becomes very sexy. So not only do we give them this nice title, we also explain to them that at the end, when they leave, no one's really going to remember what they did and what they accomplished. People forget very quickly as soon as you walk out that door. But the people who will not forget you and will not forget what you did for them and will talk about you, the people who will essentially cement your legacy are your mentees. And once I explain it in that way, they are often all in, because by mentoring the next generation, they are cementing their legacy, and they are assuring that people will talk about the great things that they have done, not just for the organization, but also for other people. So that's something to consider, Carolyn.
And there's something to add to that, and that's about, in addition to what Ruth has said, really focusing on the benefits of being a mentor. Really interesting research that showed that mentees are 5 times more likely to be promoted. Now, that's easily explainable away. You can say, well, actually, most people who are being mentored might well be on a talent development program, so it's in line for promotion. But the interesting stat for me is that mentors are 6 times more likely to be promoted. I can't explain that away in the same way, other than, and this comes to my second benefit to a mentor, I have learned as much, if not more, by trying to help other people find solutions to their challenges in a mentoring role or a peer mentoring role than I have when people have been mentoring me. That's not to diminish the value of the mentoring I've received. It's been hugely valuable, but I've probably been involved in more conversations generally where I'm supporting other people. But the process of stepping away from my day-to-day and focusing in on someone else's challenges and thinking it through helps me solve my own challenges. So being a mentor isn't purely altruistic. And Carolyn, if you're struggling to engage with people to mentor, 2 things. Number 1, focusing on the benefits to that mentor of doing so. Make it a selfish act to a degree, not a purely altruistic one. And secondly, you need to look at the organizational culture and the organizational expectation. And is the culture too much about short-term deadlines and project completion, and less about thinking about the long term?
Yeah, I think, we hear the not enough mentors come up a lot within programs. And I think there's any number of ways that I think, when you're running a program for mentors or you're looking for more of that, you can kind of decide to pursue a solution. But some of it is also, expanding or putting out more ideas about what a mentor really is. I think some people, when asked, are you a mentor or could you be a mentor, might self-opt out because they think they haven't experienced enough in their career, or they're not to that level, or they don't match what they think, what their mind says a mentor is, which probably has some, kind of other connotations to it, from the world outside. But, there's a lot of things about not kind of promoting the idea of becoming a mentor to more people and making it more approachable and accessible. And obviously we want mentors to have a degree of knowledge or skill that they can pass on to someone else. But sometimes we have maybe a limited idea of what mentors are, both for ourselves or for our organization. And then we don't promote the idea, beyond in other departments or other functions, or, think about it in other career stages as well. So I'd love to know kind of what you all think on that front, as far as like what organizations can do to really increase that mentor pool for their programs.
I think it's really leading by example, and I want to share a true story about how I mentored a Nobel Prize winner. I'm a social scientist and I study high achievers. And one of the people who I worked with, who became a very good friend, is a Nobel Prize winner. And he's very well known for his work. And he came out with his own book, an autobiography. But everyone who he knows is within that scientific world. And he approached me one day and he said, look, I'm really trying to get the word out there. I wrote this book. I'd like people to read it outside my circle. So I'm never going to be a Nobel Prize winner, but I've had books that became bestsellers. So I knew how to do that, how to market a book. So while he was mentoring me about my academic progression, I was mentoring him about book marketing. And it worked beautifully. So there's always this give and take. There's, after a while in the true mentoring relationships, you forget who's giving and who's receiving. It's so symbiotic. Andy, what do you think?
Well, in terms of, I think it comes back to my previous answer, and that's about embracing the culture or shifting the culture of the organization. And part of that is ensuring that your senior leadership are talking about the benefits they get from their mentoring, not just historically, but now. If senior leadership are acting as role models and saying, I get mentored, that makes a big difference. It's about making sure that people who are engaging in mentoring are supported in doing so that their line manager or their colleagues on their team don't complain and whine when they step away from their day-to-day work in order to go to a mentoring session or follow up with a mentoring session, and actually celebrate mentoring achievements. So it's weaving mentoring into the DNA of the organization, and that needs to be the focus. It's not this hidden little thing for a few people that you almost need to be embarrassed about, but it's something that's celebrated and is aspirational and available to all.
I think also you bring up a good point, Andy, that you need to have the kind of champions in your organization, whatever organization that is, who will talk about mentoring, whether that's at, a town hall for an organization or a next faculty meeting, or, just in the kind of peer groups that they have that will talk about mentoring, talk about the program that you're having, and kind of go out there. And, I don't think anyone necessarily signs up for this, without being asked. There usually has to be a little nudging for those people to speak openly about mentoring. Certainly, if you have a culture where mentoring is coming from the top down and it's believed in from leaders, and you're seeing it, there's a lot more openness about mentoring in the org. But even if you're at an organization that maybe isn't as mentoring culture forward, there are people that I'm sure have had mentoring experiences and impacts on their lives that would, gladly, step forward and be maybe that ambassador for it, but they may not think to do it on their own. So finding those people in your organization and kind of pushing them to speak out and to, help you to, recruit more mentors or get people enrolled in your program, as well as talking about the benefits. I mean, the benefits is a huge thing that you all talked about in the beginning, which is like, people forget about the personal, the soft skills and the hard skills that you can benefit from, but also that, people who are mentored perform better in the workplace. They tend to be retained longer. They tend to receive more promotions. We see that with Chronus customers, certainly. And people are also gaining skills over time, and also creating better networks in their organization, and that's a huge thing to combat that kind of disengagement that's flowing through the workplace these days, and kind of since 2020 and things like that. So I think that's all great pieces of advice to kind of help people think about ways to expand their mentor pool.
Amanda, I spoke at an organization that had a mentoring week where they were highlighting all their mentor matches, and they had, they said Amanda achieved such and such this year, and this was her mentor who helped her, and they had videos and conversations and photos, and it was a great festive time, and I was there to give a keynote and explain some things, and then they had this mentees could vote on their favorite mentors, and then they had the top 10 or whatever. And then they had cupcakes with the faces of the top 10 mentors. Now, these were people who some of them were super high ranked, but they were so excited over this cupcake with their face on it. I had never seen anything like it in my life, because they have achieved so much, but it was the cupcake. It was being recognized by their mentees. That was so important to them. I happened to know one of the mentors. He took a picture, he sent it to his wife, he sent it to his kids. He was so excited. So sometimes there are ways that we can recognize the mentors and the work that they do, because really for them, it's also about paying it forward. And how are we able to recognize not just the achievements of the mentees, but the mentors who are sharing their knowledge and sharing their network. And sometimes all it takes is a cupcake with their face on it.
Can I share something a little bit worrying along the same lines? And I think I've got it behind me. If I just look behind me. So a few years ago, I spoke overseas, and for the VIP guests, there were tissue boxes in front of their tables with pictures of the speakers on the lid. That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So stick with the cupcakes and not a tissue box with your picture on the lid.
Oh, Andy, I got you beat. I got a bobblehead.
There you go.
I think I prefer the bobblehead. I like that. Can I just, Dave's asked a question. Dave Adcox has asked in the Q&A, do we have sources for the stat that Gen Z stays for 2 years, but 5 years? And I've got to read more underneath, but it was a 5-year if they're mentored. I believe it's the Deloitte Global Millennial Survey. I can double check that and come back if need be. Just drop me an email. My details you can get through the resources. But I believe, and Ruth might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Deloitte Global Millennial Survey.
Yeah, and we can follow up also with the there'll be a follow-up with the recording and everything in there, and we could put any additional resources that you all have in that as well. So we'll make a note of that one, because I do think it is the Deloitte study, if I'm not mistaken. But I know we've been talking about this kind of idea of getting more mentors for mentoring programs, but would love to know, you all recently wrote a HBR article on this topic as well, but what are other things that where you see kind of mentoring programs, even with the best intentions, unfortunately miss the mark?
One of the things we did with the HBR article was we brought in a colleague of mine called Ben Athia. And I invited Ben to join Ruth and I in writing the article for a simple reason. I'd read his book, and I've known Ben for a while. He brought out a book earlier this year. He specializes in staying human as you scale a business. And what struck me when I read the book and its relevance to what we talk about in terms of mentoring programs is that human engagement, although his end focus is staying human with your customers as you scale, it starts with that human connection internally within the organization, because as organizations grow and processes take over, it's so easy to lose that connection. So one of the things we really wanted to get across in the article was about that human interaction. And there were two things that came from Ben that I would add to what we've been talking about in answer to that question. Number one is treating people inside your organization as a consumer. So not saying to them, you're on a mentoring program, or we've put a mentoring program in place to you, and telling them what you've done, but selling it to them and really engaging with them through that sales approach. And I'm not talking about a hard sale, but an enrollment sale, really bringing them on board so they're buying rather than being sold to. The second thing that's related to that, because it's how you do it, is storytelling. And this goes back to both mine and Ruth's answer to the last question. You tell stories, you share successes. You don't say you're on a mentoring program and it's going to help you in your career. You say so-and-so was on this program last year. This is what happened and made the change. And this is what the result was. We want to do the same for you. So those are my two things in answer to that, to build that picture of really creating greater engagement with mentoring programs. And going back to Carolyn's question earlier, and I think Lisa had a similar challenge. It's exactly the same with mentors. Don't tell them you need mentors. Don't tell them you want them to be a mentor in a program, but make it something they buy into and they want to engage with, and use stories to do so. So-and-so was a mentor on the program last year. This is what it did for them.
They got a cupcake with their face on it.
Well, and having people who've been in the program, be the storytellers for your program going forward is great. So whether you're highlighting them through a recognition ceremony or giving an award for, top mentors, we can't overlook the fact that everyone likes recognition in some capacity. Just might need to find out what the best way for your organization would be. But I think reminding them and constantly, to your point, Andy, selling the program and the benefits of it time and time again are so important, because number one, people forget. Number two, people are busy. Number three, our attention spans are short. And so constantly reminding them through storytelling, whether you're having testimonials from current mentor mentees to senior leaders talking about it, and kind of reinforcing that, and then promoting the program through any variety of mediums, whether that's through email, through the intranet, through a Slack message, through a Teams, through the town hall. What are all the different ways you can do it within an organization to make sure that, the tried and true marketing trope of, tell them what you told them, tell them that you told them, and then tell them again about that time that you told them. That's what it takes to make it stick, and then make someone say, oh, I remember hearing about that. I think I might actually go back and spend some time on, delving into what that would take to get enrolled or something like that, and finding a mentor.
And a really simple structure to have in mind, and this is basics, but that doesn't mean we all know it, or we know it, but we don't necessarily apply it, is problem, solution, benefit. What's going to resonate with the person you're trying to reach in terms of something they want to achieve, their challenge, their problem, their next goal. How does being a mentor or mentee on this program help solve that problem or that challenge, or help them achieve their ambition? And as a result, what does their world look like afterwards? And if you can create that as the framework of your story, it's much more likely to resonate.
That's true.
I want to talk a little bit about, I think a lot of times, getting people to the program is one thing, but then getting people consistently to engage in their mentoring relationship can be tough. Again, people's attention spans are short. Things come up, whether at work or in personal life, and kind of draw some of that focus away. What kind of suggestions or best practices do you all have for really continuing the engagement once you're even in a relationship, making sure that people are coming back to that relationship in a consistent, productive way?
I think there are a few things. One, I am less of a formal person when it comes to these things. I feel that having a mentoring contract, as some people have, which is not enforceable, I think that's a little bit strict. I think having meetings every other Tuesday for an hour is also a bit rigid, because what happens if I have a question on Thursday, right? So I think part of the way to do it is, let's talk about one or two problems. Let me know what it is in advance. No one says it has to be an hour. What if we can respond in 20 or 30 minutes, right? By making it more fluid and allowing for these, as you said, flash mentoring, or as I call them, hallway mentoring or mini mentoring sessions in between, I think that's a lot more helpful. If you guide it in advance by letting the person know, I want to discuss this issue, and letting them know what this issue is, then we can solve that one issue. And you'll feel that something has been accomplished during that meeting, and we didn't just eat. We actually did something productive, which would make you look forward to that next meeting, because you know in 20, 30 minutes, I can solve a challenge I'm having that would take me hours and hours and hours to figure out on my own. But with the guidance of a mentor, I can actually see it through in less time. That could save me a lot of time and give me a different perspective.
I'm a bit more of a fan of the formal mentoring program. I like both, and I think it's good to have a mix as part of your mentoring team. For that to be successful, you've got to keep your eye on the objective. So both the mentor and the mentee need to have a really strong conversation up front about, well, what are we trying to achieve? And what is the mentee looking for from the mentor? What are their expectations? And are they reasonable? And then review, reframe, refresh. In other words, on a regular basis, check back in on what those aspirations are, those objectives are, and are you on track? Have things shifted? You know, if a good mentor may well have a different perspective that will change the goal. I went to a peer mentoring group once with a challenge about marketing my business. That was my objective, market my business better. But with their advice, I needed to change course for my business completely, close that business, start a new one, because it wasn't the right one for me. So I had to review that objective, reframe it, and refresh, start again. What's my objective now? So you start with a clear objective, you review it, you reframe, do we need to change anything, and then refresh the objective so that you are constantly checking your course, making sure that you're on the right one. Ruth said, make sure you're not just having a meal. A couple of years ago, I met with my mentor, and we get on really well. We have a lot in common. We're both big sports fans. We're both big music fans. We both go to a lot of sports. We both go to a lot of gigs. And we met for lunch, mentoring session over lunch. And we got to dessert. And we were halfway through dessert before we started talking about my business needs. And at the end of that session, I said, look, our next mentoring session, we need to be in your boardroom. It's fine if we go for lunch before or after, but for the mentoring session, we need to be in a professional environment so that we remember why we're there. So you also need to think about the environment you are mentoring in.
And, you know, I think, Andy, what's important is for people to understand, when we wrote the book, Financial Times Guide to Mentoring, we didn't agree on everything. In fact, there were 2 areas where we disagreed. And I think everyone who's watching saw one of them happen right now. But what we did, and this was a conscious decision, is that if we disagreed, we told the reader that we disagreed. And we said the pros and cons of each so that the reader could make their own opinion could form their own opinion based on what's right for them, but that they had both perspectives. So I think actually disagreeing sometimes made the book stronger.
Yeah. And back to this question about the relationship between the mentor and the mentee. Melissa has asked in the Q&A about what engagement means in mentoring. And hopefully, I see you posted that a few minutes ago, Melissa. I'm hoping that what Ruth and I have just shared goes some of the way towards answering that. Engagement is about knowing what you're trying to achieve, about not going through the motions, but actually moving forward, whether in a one-off conversation, whether in an ongoing series of meetings, an ongoing relationship. But engagement means that you are engaged on a professional level, not the engagement over lunch that my mentor and I had, but the engagement towards a stated objective, whether that's a specific challenge, whether it's career development, whatever it might be. The engagement for me is that both are invested in the relationship. so that the mentor is invested in their mentee's success. They know they've got a big pitch coming up, or they've got a big interview, and they're messaging them to say good luck or how did it go. And the mentee trusts their mentor, and they believe in their mentor, and they listen to their advice. And a really important point, that doesn't mean they take their advice. It's their career, it's their decision, but they listen to it. So hopefully that helps with Melissa's question as well.
I would add a two-part. Engagement means you have to learn something when you're together. If you're all going to be brought in, it can't be for nachos. It has to be so that you are actually learning something and you're walking away better informed than when you walked in. Having those social engagements is great. And this is another reason that Andy and I partnered for the book. But if you don't know how to network with people and engage in conversation that is not about the weather, then you need to understand how to strategically talk to people in a way that doesn't feel transactional, but a way that it's building relationships. Because if you are able to do that, then the engagement becomes so much stronger, because after the engagement, you will circle back to the social, and really it becomes really a full cycle where you're meeting people, learning something, and then doing the follow-up reflection.
Yeah, I think the follow-up piece and what Andy was saying as well, there's a level of accountability in a mentoring relationship that, where that engagement really comes to, rubber hits the road on you've come back with some update, something, some next step that you've done, and you're being accountable to that person to,
Yes.
give the update of what you did. And, even though we can give the update on the next nachos you had or the next cupcake you had, really what you're talking about is that next step in the goals that you've set out, and that's what's so important about setting goals in the beginning, is you have that, here's what I want to achieve. And not just for the mentee. I mean, the mentee obviously has some thoughts, but the mentor should also have some things that they would like to achieve. And you can be helping each other on both of those, as well as holding each other accountable to, what did you do on that next step? Or were you able to go to that event? Were you able to have coffee with that person? Did you go for that stretch assignment that you wanted at work? And saying, not only is it good to see you again, but how did that piece that we talked about last time go for you? Whether you're meeting a month later, a week later, 2 months later, there should be that kind of accountability there.
Yep.
We are going to kind of get into more of, we've been bringing audience questions in the whole time, but get into a more kind of formalized Q&A session, here in just a minute. So please, if you haven't put any questions in, please do. This is probably the most actual in the Q&A section questions I've seen in an audience. So you take direction very well. Thank you so much. But yeah, I want us to get into some questions real quick here. But let's see what we've got and what we've already answered. Karen asked, what are your thoughts on journaling by mentors and mentees before and immediately after mentoring conversations?
This is a really sort of interesting area for me. It's something I've battled with for a long time. Let me take myself first as the mentor. I'm not a natural note taker, although I've become much more natural at it over recent years. And I've always got that trade-off between taking notes during a meeting and just focusing and concentrating. So I've always encouraged my mentees to take notes and send them across to me. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of salespeople. And salespeople typically, and I'm generalizing, are not very good at taking notes. And when you ask them to journal afterwards, and I've always asked them, journal afterwards and send me your takeaways from the session. And a week before our next session, send me what's been happening, and keep a diary, keep a note, what's been happening over the time between our session, so that we know what to focus on. I would say 1 in 10 does it. And for a long time, I took that personally, until my own mentor supervisor helped me recognize that it's just learning styles and preferences, and it's not about that, because I would get disconsolate between sessions and think they didn't value what we were doing, and then they'd come on the session and I'd be resenting it and not looking forward to it, and they would show me that they had actually put into action what we had discussed. They just hadn't told me about it. So I think it's down to individual styles to a degree. What is working for me now And it depends on the nature of who I'm mentoring and the industry they're in. So I work with a lot of sensitive industries, pharmaceuticals, financial services, a lot of confidential information. But where they're comfortable, I use an AI note taker that brilliantly summarizes. So ideal world, they journal all the way through between sessions. They're capturing challenges as they come up, so that by the time they reach the mentoring session, they can flick back at their notes and say, I want to talk about this, this, and this, and let me know a couple of days in advance. In a real world scenario, doesn't happen often enough.
So again, I'll put the academic hat on. And what Andy's describing beautifully describes the different ways that we take in and process information. Journaling is one way to process information, but it doesn't work for everyone. So it can work for certain people, but other people, for example, need to talk it through. So if there is something that happened or something that was said, you might want to let it simmer in your brain a little bit. And then the next day, the next week, whoever, actually talk it out with someone. These are the people who actually do better working in smaller groups as opposed to in isolation. Extroverts usually do better by talking it through as opposed to journaling. So just realize that just because somebody is not journaling is not because they are being lazy. It's really not the way they process information. It's not that they can't do it. They're not comfortable. They would be much better talking it out. And when you talk it out with another person, somebody is able to say, well, what about, and how about, and have you considered, and ask those questions to really get you reflect on a higher level.
Yeah, I think you have to kind of find what works best for you and your mentoring partner and talk about that. If it is journaling, if it's talking out loud, if it's taking notes throughout, if it's, post-it notes on your computer or whatever it might be, find the thing that works and kind of lean into that to help you, move forward with tasks or outcomes or anything like that. Another question from Lisa, she asks, how can we determine the success of the program outside just the number of colleagues engaged in the mentoring relationships themselves?
What was that question, Dan?
How can we determine the success of the program?
The success of the program beyond just looking at, how many participants or connections you have in the program.
In the book, we talk about tangible and intangible outcomes. With tangible outcomes, then you've got a metric by which to measure it. Now, obviously, the challenge is, does that metric take place within the lifetime of the relationship or beyond that? And can you track the results over a period of time? So if you've got people on a 1-year program that you want to make director in 3 years, are you keeping in touch with them and correlating their success back? So over a period of time, you've got that story to tell that we were talking about. But having some short-term, medium-term, long-term tangible metrics is really important. Where you have intangibles, have milestones. So you're saying, okay, this person wants to increase their confidence giving presentations and they want a mentor to support them doing that. That's an intangible outcome. But what you can measure is that if you're going to be more confident delivering presentations, you're going to step up and deliver 5 presentations this year you wouldn't have done otherwise, because that's going to be one tick box on that journey. And so you can measure whether that's happening and then the growth of participation towards that goal. So for my contribution, I would say split your tangibles and intangible outcomes. And for the tangible outcomes, work out what your metrics are. And for the intangibles, what are your milestones?
I agree.
Yeah, I think another thing that we talk to customers a lot about is, you have this idea of the organizational impact of mentoring is like, are you seeing people advance? Are you seeing people be retained more if they're participating in mentoring? Do they have a general better satisfaction overall? Are they feeling more engaged? And then you also have, the kind of more maybe employee or person focused things where it's, do they feel like they're learning? Do they feel that they are, more connected or more supported by an organization because they've been in a mentoring relationship, or they feel like they're making strides on their learning goals, as well as like, are they feeling more connected? Do they feel better belonging in the organization as a whole, or does it feel more inclusive to them? Because there can be these kind of big organizational goals that people are trying to reach, but there can also be those kind of personal things where do I feel better as an employee or a student or association member or whatever it might be, now that I'm engaging in these types of conversations and these types of relationships. And so you can be measuring that through surveys, you can be looking at it through literal people data, through your HRIS system, but you should definitely be looking at it from a wide-ranging angle of metrics so that you can kind of understand what the real impact of mentoring is, I think.
And what you've described there, when you talk about the organizational and the individual, it's my answer can apply to both. So you can have your organizational tangibles and intangibles and the individual ones. The other thing you can do is benchmark. So, for example, one of the resources I know you're going to share at the end is and in fact it's under the resources, the docs tab, is the quiz that Ruth and I developed. So measure the impact of your mentoring activity. You could take that today, and then you could take it in 6 months' time or a year's time. You can, if you're a mentor, you can get your mentee to go through the same process, because it's designed for both mentors and mentees. It's just, you answer the questions based on the role that you're playing in that case. So you can benchmark it, so you can take it at intervals and see if things have changed as well.
Yeah. Ruth, we had a question for you from Dave, that he was curious about what mentoring looks like at Cornell's organization and what the kind of maybe different pockets of mentoring are there.
Sure. So I used to be the inaugural assistant dean for mentoring there. And I spoke about the different ways that people take in and process information. So what we did at the time through a mentoring academy was that we had one-on-one mentoring, we had small team mentoring, we had lunch mentoring with senior people. We had speakers, large groups, small groups. So really we tried to get to every type of learner as we taught them how to develop their own mentoring teams. Now within departments, we also have one-on-one, and we have different affinity groups. And within the affinity groups, we actually teach mentoring as well, how to do it well, how to partner with other people, how to pay it forward. We say everyone mentor one, because everyone should be mentoring, but they should also be mentored.
Any more final questions from the audience? Please send us in through chat or Q&A. We'll try to get
there
through
is
one
more. There's one that we haven't covered, and I don't know if we've got time to do it in depth, but I can add one thing to it. So Dolores asked, what are the top 3 to 5 traits you look for before someone becomes a mentee and mentor? I've got a really simple answer for one trait we haven't talked about today, and that's vulnerability. And that's in both parties. The mentee will, particularly in a traditional hierarchical relationship within the same company, they'll want to impress their mentor. But believe it or not, the mentor probably wants to impress their mentee as well. And both need to let go of that, because you need a really open and honest conversation if you're going to have an impact. So the mentor needs to let go of being perfect. They need to recognize that if you share where you've challenged and you've had challenges and struggles along the way and made mistakes, your mentee is going to not only learn from those mistakes and challenges, but they're also going to see you as more human. Your message will be more resonant, and that's going to create the space for them to open up a little bit more. Because you need a relationship where they fit, that they will listen to you if you push them and challenge them and call them out and not sugarcoat things. But you've got to earn that trust. And the mentee needs to be vulnerable, because if you're holding things back from your mentor, how can they possibly help you?
It's very true. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I want to make sure that we share, as Andy mentioned, these resources. There's QR codes here, but they are linked in the docs section, so please check them out. They're both the mentoring quiz, as well as you can find out more about the Financial Times, Guide to Mentoring book that Andy and Ruth have both worked on. And we are so grateful that they've been able to share some of their expertise with us today. And things that you can do next, connect with Andy or Ruth on LinkedIn. There's QR codes there. Access our National Mentoring Month resources. So these are other things that will help you with mentoring programs, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, a program administrator. It'll be all kinds of things for just how you can engage in National Mentoring Month within your organization. And then, as always, Chronus, we're here as both a mentoring platform and an employee resource group platform, but ultimately we're focused on purpose-driven development, and can help you with any of your mentoring strategies or mentoring scaling, anything that you're looking to, bring to your mentoring program in order to make a more effective and successful event. So thank you all once again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we know that everyone else, I think, really enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for the questions. They were great to have in there, and to have Andy and Ruth both have a chance to kind of impart some of their wisdom.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. And you all have a great rest of your day. We appreciate it.